And so I do appreciate interruptions as well. And I'm gonna just introduce myself a little bit more, if you don't mind. I'm not sure, I don't know what people want. Write in the chat what you want, and I'm very happy to. Oh, I can't see the chat. Oh, okay, moderator, you're gonna have to read chats to me then. So I just want everyone to type in the chat if you can. If you were to rate, all the organs of your body, kidneys, heart, lungs, brain, and let's say we have 10 organs. Put the number that you think eyes would be for you. 1 to 10. Okay, limbs. Okay, let's go. Limbs, brain, lungs, kidneys, bowel. I'm grasping at straws here because I only do eyes. So if you could just type in the chat, how important do you think it is? And don't try to butter me up by putting number 1. Maybe ears are very important to you, or your hair is important to you. I know many boys that the hair is important to them as number 1, and then maybe eyes number 2. And so it'd be great just to see what everyone thinks, because today I'm going to talk about diabetes in eyes. And my background is I'm a consultant ophthalmologist at Morpheus Eye Hospital. And I've been an ophthalmologist from training till now for almost 20 years. As a consultant, about 7-8 years, but I really took my time with the training, so I'm a bit old. But diabetes has always been a focus, and my PhD, when I did it, was also about diabetes and eyes. So today, whilst I look at the chat, because now I'm able to see it, I see 2s and 3s. I don't see a 1. I'm happy with that. Okay, lower down. So I can only improve from here. I feel I have work to do. So today, I have lots that I can talk about, but I would like to be led by you. And I hate to give a didactic talk, but I will drone on for the first 10-15 minutes, just so that we can kind of get to know each other. But I'd like to talk about how diabetes affects the eyes. What are the current treatments? What is the diabetic eye screening program? Why is that important, not only for our country? In the UK, we really lead the world in this. And then if we have time, I'd like to talk about cool stuff that we're doing currently. 1 for brain. Yeah, brain is important. Sometimes, yeah. Okay, so I think let's start with the most important thing. Why is diabetes important in the eyes? So if you have diabetes for 15 years, most of people with type 1 will have some degree of retinal damage. And then, a good proportion, almost 80% of those with type 2 will have some degree of retinal damage. And this isn't old data. This is something that people just spit out, because we know that type 1 and type 2, there's a lot of mixed types now. And the whole world of diabetes has progressed beyond just a dichotomous 1 and 2. But I think, just these stats that are very poignant shows why diabetes is important for the eyes. And a caveat here before I go into that is, it is important particularly because it affects the eyes silently. It's one of these silent stealers of vision, and you don't feel it until it's almost too late. And that's why I think when we touch on the screening program, why that's important. So how does diabetes affect the eyes? I'm trying to make this quite broad. And so if I'm underselling, please, just put in the chat and then someone say, oh, okay, we know. But I will go, from the base. So diabetes affects the eyes because it affects blood vessels. And that's why it affects the heart, brain, kidneys, limbs, etc., etc. And the eyes have an interesting vasculature, really interesting blood vessel supply, in that it's besides the kidney, is one of the only organs of the body that has tiny blood vessels that end there. And so diabetes and kind of the blood glucose levels particularly affects those tiny blood vessels that supply the eye. And interestingly, the eye one of the layers of the eyes has the highest blood supply of the entire body, and the other organ, I cannot mention because I think it'd be inappropriate. I see people of an age that I cannot say, but it's a male organ, and the eyes actually have equivalent the highest vasculature in the eyes, and that's why diabetes affects it. And you see here a blood vessel, drawn in cross section, which is beautiful. You have the outside lining, and then you have the muscular layer. Can you see my arrow? You get a nice muscular layer here, and then you have the in-between layers that's like cling film. But the endothelium is what's important. That's where the blood flows through, and that's the lumen or the hose pipe, the inside of the eye. And it's lined by a really, really delicate layer of cells that are very affected by high glucose levels. And when they die, the blood vessels start to leak. It's sort of like a hose pipe. It starts to leak, and then they slowly die off. And the small ones die first, the medium ones die later, bigger ones die later after that. Big blood vessels tend to be affected by blood pressure, cholesterol, etc. But the teeny, teeny, tiny blood vessels that supply your kidneys, brain, and your eyes, they don't like high glucose levels. So how visually significant consequences of diabetes? There are two things, that people talk about diabetes and eyes all the time, but it's so vague, but you really want to go to the crux of the matter. If you have that problem, you want to know, how will it affect my eyes? And there are two ways that it can affect your eyes, only two big ways. One, called proliferative diabetic retinopathy. That's when the eyes start to grow normal blood vessels that bleed. The second way is called diabetic macular edema, and I purposely use nomenclature that people will see in their letters, because I think that's important. But all that means is abnormal blood vessels that leak. So the key words here are bleed and leak, and my entire talk today will hang on these two key factors. So what does it look like in the eye? To me, this is a very normal picture, but I assume most people won't look at this every day. But this is what the back of your eye looks like. The middle bit, that center bit, is your optic nerve. So it's like a cable that brings all the information from the eye into your brain. It goes through stuff and goes into your brain. But it's, there's a beautiful kind of small wires that go into that white thing and goes into your brain. But it also has a little hollow bit where all the blood vessels come out from, and it supplies the retina as well as brings blood back in the arteries and veins. This is not a normal retina. This is an eye with diabetes, and you know that because you see these little dots. And that's the earliest sign of diabetes. We call them microaneurysms. And there are just the tiniest vessels that start to become, so when they lose the endothelium, remember the hose pipe? So when you lose the lining, bits of it starts to bulge out. And that's what you see there. And then it goes on. I'm going to show like a series of 7 gory pictures. I hope people like pictures because I love pictures. And, it becomes worse, and you start to have hemorrhages in different layers of the eye. So this is an example of a much more prolific retinal hemorrhages. Your veins start to do funny things as well because the blood supply is compromised. So they start to loop, and we call these venous loops. Is this significant? I will talk to you. These are all preambles of what we will arrive at. Cotton wool spots, what are they? If you see this word cotton wool spots, they do look like cotton wool, and if you see that. So the eye is not just comprised of blood vessels, but it's got 3 main components. It has blood vessels, yes, and we saw microaneurysms, and we saw retinal hemorrhages, but we also have a layer on top and in between of the wires that I talked about with bringing information, so the nerve layers. And nerves are not just, they're not just a little wire. A nerve actually has fluid that flows, that nourishes. And if that's compromised, it starts to back up, and it looks like these little fluffy cotton wool bits. And you know that the eye is not healthy when you have these cotton wool spots. But what we're trying to avoid here, and those are the preambles of really abnormal blood vessels growing in the back of the eye. Why does this happen? When you see blood vessels that have a compromised lining, so yes, they leak, but they also die off. So you have bits of the retina or the back of the eye that are starved of oxygen. When you're starved of oxygen, the eye produces a molecule that says, let's grow some more blood vessels because we need to supply more oxygen. But they grow in a very abnormal fashion, and we call these new vessels. And we classify them by where they are. So these are new vessels on the nerve at the back of the eye or the optic disc. We call it a disc because it's a circle, but actually it's a long thing. And what happens is these blood vessels bleed very easily. You can have blood vessels that grow in other bits of the retina. You can see they're very abnormal, they're frilly. I don't know if it's too much, actually. I love these pictures. I'm showing a lot of them, but it's one of these things that retinal specialists share with each other. But the end point of this is they do bleed because they don't supply oxygen to the eye. They're very abnormal. They don't have a good lining, and they are very friable and bleed easily. And here you can see, a big bleed here, different types of bleeds. And once it bleeds really badly, you can't take a good picture of it because it fills the eye and you're not able to see from the eye. So this is what we're trying to avoid, with the preambles. Once we see different stages of the preamble to new blood vessels growing, we're trying to avoid this bleeding. And what happens after bleeding if you don't treat it? It starts to scar in the eye, and all these white bits here are what we call fibrosis. When you have bleeding in the eye, it can pull on the retina, scar, and then you start to lose vision that way. The main way we treat proliferative diabetic retinopathy, so the bleeding, is to really get rid of the bits that are no longer functioning. So the bits of the retina that all the small blood vessels have died, they produce a molecule that grows these blood vessels and causes abnormal blood vessel growth and bleeding and scarring, etc. But if we catch it in time, just as it's about to grow, we find that if we laser or ablate these areas, that we're able to control and halt the progression of disease. And laser is done in a clinic setting. So you go for an outpatient clinic appointment, you have laser. Often it's done between 3 to 6 appointments, and some people need more, some people need less. Happy to talk about that a little bit later. I'm coming towards the end of the treatment bits, and I hope I'm not under talking, telling you what you already know. I like to talk about, I talked about the bleeding vessels. I like to talk about leaking vessels. So what do we see here? Here, now we all know this circle bit, that's the optic nerve. That's the disc that we see. And it's just the front face of a tube that goes into our brain that brings all the nerve fibers within the eye into our brain, carries that information. We can see blood vessels here. I think everyone would know these are blood vessels. And then in this eye here, we see a lot of yellow bits. These yellow bits are because the small blood vessels are leaking a lot of fluid. And as it leaks and dries up, it leaves a residue behind. And that residue is predominantly fat-based. We call these exudates. And you can see just some examples here. This is an example of leaky vessels. And that's the second thing that can cause vision loss in diabetes, and by far the more common. Less devastating than the bleeds and the scarring, and you can lose your entire vision. This one is more insidious, and it takes months and years for you to lose vision. Ophthalmology is very much dominated by our scans. We are very lucky in that the eye, at the back of the eye, is transparent. So a CT scan of your brain would require radiation. But when you want to do a cross-sectional scan of the eye, we only need to use normal light wavelengths. And its reflectance allows us to see all the layers of the eye. And here you might hear of, at some point, an optical coherence tomography. We call it OCT. And this is a normal scan, smack in the middle of this retina here, and this is the important bit where we all read from. We call it the fovea of the macula. So the normal eye has many, many layers. There's, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm not going to go through it. It's too boring, but there are 10 layers. So we have the inside. So here you see the inner retina, which is predominantly all the nerve fibers that go into the optic nerve. And then you have the outer retina here, which is interesting because you have all these layers that transduce light into images that are formed in the brain. But most interestingly is this layer right at the bottom, because that acts as a pump. We have a layer of the eye, back of the eye, that is transparent, but it's only transparent because we have a layer of cells that acts like a constant pumping machine that dries it out. So it forms these beautiful, well-organized layers. And the function of this is really important. I'll come to that as well. And you can see that little dip, that's a normal eye again. I think this might be my eye. Maybe not. But we also have a spongiform layer of blood vessels underneath that nourishes all the nerve layers on the top. That's really important. And in diabetes, this is what you get. So I think it doesn't take an ophthalmologist to be able to diagnose this. You can see all those circles of black here, circles, 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 a bit of fluid under here, like a little crescent, circles here, circles here. And this is really what leaking blood vessels do to disorganize the retina, because those blood vessels no longer have that intact lining. They leak into the retina very slowly. We don't tend to see this in very young patients because this bright line here is kind of the hydraulic pump of the eye. And in very young patients, even if they're leaking, that pump is working really well, and it just continuously pumps out that fluid. But as you get older, that pump function reduces and you start to get accumulation of that fluid. That really affects your reading vision. And I show this picture because I think it always looks like ciabatta, those circles. And my patients are better than me in reading their OCT scans, and they insist on having all their OCT scans on their iPhones. So I talked about leakage again. I think it's important to talk about balance of leakage and pump function. And when that doesn't match up, you get that flooding. That's how do we treat leaky vessels? So we talked about laser, and that treats the bleeding vessels. So the leaky vessels, about, I would say 10, 12 years ago, we had the first licensed drug that we were able to inject into the eye that revolutionized, I think, the lives of patients with diabetes, because it was able to dry up the macula very quickly. Prior to that, there was not a very good treatment. We did some laser, but it only worked a third of the time. And you had to do that multiple times. So treatment for leaky vessels are injections into the eyes. I'm happy to go into that, but I might just pause here and just take some questions. And maybe, Martin, did you have any comments? Lauren? Oh,
well, I actually have a question, but I'll give floor to everyone else and sort of use mine if needed.
Okay, stop sharing. I'm really interested, type in the chat if you want.
Hey, look, Dawn.
Yeah.
Dawn, I just wondered, sort of looking at those pictures, I wondered to which extent do you observe that the impact is at least similar and symmetrical on both eyes, or is it quite common that maybe one eye is impacted but not the other?
One always goes first. So one then the other quite quickly is symmetrical, but not in time. And when I talk to patients, I always talk about the monarchy. I say, this is Prince William, and that's why we had Prince Harry. You need the heir and the spare. And so, we need to be careful. And if one is gone beyond the irreparable phase, so there is a threshold where we can reverse sight loss. But that threshold is quite early. You need to catch things early. And I think the screening talk would emphasize why it's important to catch before you feel it, because once you notice it, it's actually a stage where we're fighting a losing battle.
I just asked a question. Am I coming through? I don't know.
Yeah.
So our son has diabetes, type 1, and obviously listening to what you said there obviously makes us slightly anxious. So control of glucose, obviously having regular site checks and things, but I'm going to oversimplify it. But are there 2 or 3 other things that they could really do that would make a difference? I don't know if it's diet related or exercise or other things, but if we speak to him after today and could give him 2 or 3 tips, what would they be?
How old is he?
He's 25.
Yeah, he needs to have a yearly screening check. That's the most important thing. The other thing that really affects the eyes is blood pressure. That's number 1. But as a type 1 at 25, type 1s tend to go off the rails, in their late teens into university. So if he's well controlled at 25 and out of university, you're in a fairly safe space. When if they let go of themselves at 16 to about 22, that's when we see that really devastating sight loss that goes on to the 30s, and they're sight impaired by the late 20s. But the advice is really to get regular screening, because he will not notice until it's too late. The sugar control is number 1 by 90%. If you have good sugar control, that's 100% really in my books. What the eyes do not like is hypos. If you have frequent hypos, it's worse than having a high basal sugar control. So the type 1s that do badly are those that have frequent hypos to the extent they have to go to hospital. And brittle diabetes is something that we deal with as well. Early treatment, they have regular eye screening. So if you have brittle diabetes and poor control, despite of anything that you do, we see them much more frequently than once a year.
Okay, no, that's really helpful. No, he's good with his control, and if it goes too high after listening to you, I'm going to shout at him until he goes about his business in a proper fashion. No, he's good, and he will do it well. But it's reassuring what you said.
Yeah, thank you very much. Diabetes is not something that you do day on day or week on week. It's lifetime. It's a lifetime change. So I never judge my patients when, if they have a death in the family or they're on steroids or something else and they've had an episode where it's just not been good. I say we need to support your eyes, because there is a 3-month lag from your event to when you think you've gotten a hold of yourself to the eyes being affected by how you've controlled your sugars. So, you say, okay, I had a really crappy 3 months, it was Christmas, I saw my family, that was devastating. And then, February comes and you say, I'm on the road now, my sugars are perfect. I say, yeah, but you had those 3 months, so we need to support you to probably about June to make sure the effects of which has not impacted you. There is that lag with the eyes.
I think Don, you answered, I think, Paul, your question around blood pressure. Is that right, Paul? You're happy with the answer from Don? Yeah, she confirmed. I don't know, Don, can you see the other
that's fine.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Don, can you see the other 2 questions in the chat? If not, I can read them out.
Yeah, no, I can see them now. HbA1c it's not so much the HbA1c. I think that's more the long-term control, Martin. I think you asked that. It's more the hypo episodes that I was talking about. I think HbA1c dropping is fine, because that's the cumulative 3-month effect on your glucose control. So that the HbA1c dropping has always been very positive in terms of how it impacts the eyes. I'm talking about hypo episodes.
I've actually heard of reports about people that are on some of the pumps which cannot be adjusted for basal drop or the basal range, they're dropping people too quickly and they're getting retinopathy because of that. And this is being shown in certain research that's going around at the moment. And when you go onto a pump, they're not saying anything about this. I mean, I did it 6 years ago, but people are reporting on Twitter that they're not being told about it until they've been on a pump for 3 months and they've dropped from, it's when it's very high, say 12, and they're dropping down to a normal range. It's not when you're, say, 8 and dropping down.
Yes, I completely agree that there's good evidence for that. It's the same with blood pressure control. So when we have pump patients, we tend to see them more quickly. It's the same as patients who are pregnant as well, because the control changes. It's the change that the eyes don't like. We don't know why. We don't know why. But that change. So with blood pressure, it's the same. You know, if someone has a blood pressure of 200 over 100, which we see very often, you cannot bring them down within 24 hours. They will have a stroke. You need to do it slowly. But Martin, you're completely right on that.
Yeah, I think DSNs have got to get on board with this and tell people when they go on pumps. Anyway, thank you for answering.
I think there's another question from Jane.
Yeah. Yeah, I was sorry. I open up my mute thing.
Wonderful.
I was interested if you've had some, because I know Martin, we're sort of the 50+ club of diabetes. Anyway, when I've had pan retinopathy laser pan treatment back in 1989, and I thought it was all cured with quite a few scotoma after I had it. But I had a bleed about 6 years ago, and I was currently I was in Canada. I'm now in Portugal. But anyway, it's a big story. And in Canada they wanted to give me injections, and I had injections, and the bleed stopped. But then when I came back, I had a brief visit to Britain, and I saw some, and they said, no, you should have more laser. But now I've got no more laser. And the question that I had was, if you've had all of your retina, you're lasered out, there's no space, what is the treatment if you get still proliferative retinopathy? I mean, and of course, I'm on a pump, a closed loop system, so I actually have often hypos now. It's quite interesting, the hypo risk, because I'm desperately trying not to have too many highs, because I thought that was going to damage my small vessels. But now it's like, oh, is that also going to damage your kidneys if the capillaries are so sensitive to hypos rather than hyper, which is like a reverse issue. Anyway, there are two things. It's about treatment for retinopathy, subsequent retinopathy, which seems to continue whatever you do, that's, I mean, you're not an endocrinologist, but it is a concern with the eyes that you don't really want to lose your sight.
Yeah, no, thanks, Jane. I think your question is very pertinent, and I will try to answer it to match the audience's kind of understanding of treatment as well. So you bear with me. So with laser treatment of the eyes, it often starts in the outpatient setting, and it can go on for a long time. And we do as much as we can in the outpatient setting, but you can have laser as well in the theater setting or the operating theater setting, where they numb your eye. So the eye is spherical. Every picture I've shown today is two-dimensional, which is really artificial, but it's spherical. So when we do laser, we're looking in the eye, we can only go as far out as we can, because it does come forwards. When we do laser, when you're lying down and we wear the laser on the head rather than face on, we push on the eye to push it forward. So we're able to laser more of it. So there may be more to laser. The UK really has very high standards of diabetic retinopathy treatment. And if someone tells you here that you need more laser, I probably believe it. But there's variations around the world. I do teach about diabetic retinopathy around the world. So that's one caveat. The other thing to note about injections. So there's the great thing about ophthalmology is we have like so few treatments. So we can only talk about these, you know. And so yes, laser is definitive. It's ablative, it's destructive, yes, but it keeps you going forever. Injections are temporary. It's a drug. It lasts for X amount of time in your eyes, and it's a stopgap. It buys time. And often I start with the injections because in the UK we have the NHS. I'm not so concerned about cost. If I was in a third world, you know, an injection in Ethiopia would be a 6-month salary for the average person. I've been to Ghana, I've been to other bits of Africa where it is a no-go. It doesn't even exist there. So you have no choice but to laser, but the number of laser machines there is ridiculous and so underutilized. But we don't go there, it's a different kettle of fish. But in the UK, we use injections as a stopgap because it's quick acting. It shrivels those blood vessels that are angry and gonna bleed. When you laser the bits that produce the molecule that one is attacking, you know, that injection is an anti that molecule. It gives time for that laser to work. Yeah, so I would say you may need more laser. We have a hand up. Trevor? You need to unmute.
One of the things that always worries me, I've got a phobia about eyes. It's bad enough having to go and have the thing done. They've come up with a good technique so they can do it. But is there anything, obviously keeping your blood sugars as reasonable as you can is most important, but is there anything else you can do to help the situation as well? Lifestyle changes or anything?
How often do you have injections, Trevor?
Well, I do it every morning. I'm type 2 diabetes, and I usually have a range that I keep it at aim for 7 all the time. I check my blood sugars in the morning, and I check it lunchtime as well to make sure I haven't gone low. Because the funny thing is, I had COVID, but my blood sugars went down. Normally, I get an infection, my blood sugars go up. And it kind of threw me completely. But I do worry if there's a lifestyle change I can make with my eyes or something. I do quite a lot of physical things, like walk quite a lot now, which is important to me. And obviously, I like to keep healthy and don't want to, anything to happen with my eyes anyway. Any suggestions?
I have a lot of patients, that ask me this, and I say 2 things to them. Whatever you're walking, double it slowly over the next month. Double it. It makes a difference. And I had a patient that came in, and she was someone who just sat in a chair, and she was perfectly fine. I said, walk to the end of your garden and walk back every day, 10 times. She did it, and she looked like a different human. But the other thing, Trevor.
One thing I do walk usually a minimum of 10,000 steps a day. Yesterday, I took 21,000 steps. I don't use the car. I walk, especially with the cost of fuel as well. It's making me want to walk more. But I can't see the point in taking a car these days. I can walk just as quickly as I can get the car parked.
Yeah. The other thing is the diet, which is not something you can do yourself. No one can change their diet themselves because we are all programmed to eat what we eat. For my children, it's nuggets, chips, and beans. So that's their diet. Any alteration to nuggets, chips, and beans is fraught with a big fight. So taking advantage of the programs like Daphne, etc. And the thing about diet is don't be hard on yourself. It takes years to change habit behavior, and take advantage of nutritionists, dietitians, hound them, make them tell you how you break that down and how you can live normally without weighing everything. Why would you weigh broccoli? That's stupid. But the people that have done that, taken advantage of that, and are able to change that lifestyle, because the diet thing is so hard. So hard. And I never, even my patients who smoke or etc., I tell them, it's just the long game. You play that long game. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
I see that, Donna, thank you very much for sharing sort of your story. I don't know if you want to come off mute and share it, or if not, I'll just read through this. So Donna is saying, my daughter's 16, she has been screened twice and each time been reported as having background retinopathy. She has hypos every day. We've never been told about this danger, so thank you, Dawn. So no problem.
Yeah, definitely, Donna. You know, the type 1s at that age, it's not her fault. It's a difficult control. She needs continuous glucose monitoring, and if she doesn't already have it, you need to push. I mean, the type 1s are getting it, so the pump, etc. She needs regular eye screening. That's what she needs. I never discharge a type 1. I have a type 1 who do not attend my clinics for 6, 7, 8 times, and I will still offer them another appointment, another appointment, another appointment, because the stage from the preamble, you know, all those cool kind of Putnam microaneurysms, little bleeds that we all have in the back of our eyes, we have diabetes, to the proliferative stage. With type 1s is the time spent short, especially at the young age, and they don't know it until it's really, really advanced. The older you are, if you have mixed type or type 2, you have months. So with type 1s, I think good eye screening is the preventative. The minute we see them tip over that threshold, we give them good laser. They can still drive, but they are safe. They retain the sight for the rest of their life. Okay, Martin, shall I use the last 10 minutes to talk about cool stuff, or do people want?
That would be great.
Either cool stuff, or I could preach to you about screening. But I could do that in 1 second, saying, get your eyes checked at least once a year if you're okay. You know, come on. If you have diabetes, get it checked. It's a no-brainer. Quick picture of the eye.
Very clear message.
Very clear
message. Let's crack on with the cool stuff then, Dawn.
I'll be quick with that as well. Share screen. Okay. So I'm a consultant ophthalmologist, but what I've been really passionate about in the last kind of 5, 6, 7 years is empowering people to have a real ownership and impact on their own care. And I didn't put the WHO statement here because I can't remember your name now, but the person with the child with diabetes, it's not empowering the patient itself or the person, but it's empowering the family, you know, the external kind of wider community, as well as the country, with how to own any chronic illness and have that where you can test yourself and access care in a very seamless fashion. And that's not available at the moment. So we've been really pushing for that. So in the eye sphere, how are we doing it? So NHS at Home is one of these new NHS organizations. I'm being recorded, so I won't say anything controversial. But NHS England came up with this in the COVID era, where they were able to discharge patients home much sooner than they could, by just providing people with oximetry at home. And, you know, people were able to identify patients who were decompensating at home. They got to hospital sooner, they got to go home sooner. So it was a win-win-win-win. So you think, you know, this is all like cool kind of wires in the sky, all Wi-Fi, Bluetooth connected. And I asked the nurse and the head of NHS at Home how they actually did it. It was by telephone and Excel spreadsheets and sometimes pen and paper. But it was possible, you know, it was done. And so we do blood pressure monitoring at home, we do blood sugar monitoring at home. And I think in this cohort, we understand home monitoring. In the eye sphere and other specialties, we don't understand it. Oh, I did put the WHO definition of self-care, which I feel it should be a huge emphasis of the NHS in the future. The ability of individuals, families, communities to not only prevent disease, maintain health, but with or without the support of a healthcare personnel. And really this organization, this group is an exemplar of this, and just the first stage in what can be done. So with eyes, how do we check eyes at home? So we used to give this grid to patients. We say, oh, okay, this is a piece of paper with some, it's like if your child does mathematics at school, you have that as a graph paper. But cover one eye, look at the dot. Cover the other eye, look at the dot. If you see any wobbles or something that's wrong, let us know, But there was no way to record this, and you can't monitor someone on this. How do I know if you're worse this day or that day? Is the wiggly more wiggly? I have to rely on you telling me. It doesn't work. And this is often what we see with patients coming in with drawings, etc. I had a chat with a whole kind of folder of these, it made me leaf through them, but it's really not ideal. So what we've done is we've used the smartphone to engage people at home. We ask them a few questions about their general health, never too many at once, because they do the test multiple times. You can ask different questions each time. And they're able to use that to access us as well for appointments. We are able to see the test results. Very simply, we ask them to align on your left. You see a little dot. We say, make a straight line with that dot, move it with the arrows. And they do that in different orientations of the field. And we have a traffic light system that's red, amber, green, green being good, red being bad. And there's an onboarding process, as you see on the right here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It teaches you how to do it, but it also tells you the score is from 0 to 100. You get your own personalized score by your threshold. We baseline you, so we know how you're doing every day. And that information is fed live into a system that I can access anytime. I never access it, but what happens is if you have 3 reds in a row, I know that your vision's getting worse at home, and my receptionist or administrative staff will engage you with a telephone call to offer you an appointment sooner than you would have been given to come in. So if you have 6 monthly, yearly appointments, if you get worse, we'll offer you an appointment within days or weeks, depending on how you are. So this is just an example. My hospital wanted to take a picture of me and one of the other staff, pretending to teach them how to do it. In reality, I don't teach people how to use this application. My nursing and technician staff do. And we did a lot of it via video consultation. And that was me like 2 years ago. I look so much younger during the COVID lockdown. And I did so many video consultations because they shut our eye unit down. There's one of my colleagues doing video consultations for accident emergencies that we were very successful at. I'm not going to go through the details because we are short of time, but I just wanted to show this picture. You see that smartphone on the right? So that's not my youthful hand. That's the hand of my fellow that works with me. And she's been really championing this project, recruiting patients, making sure they're okay. But that's the smartphone of one of my patients with diabetes, and she's allowed me to share her story. She's very cool, actually. She says, oh, and we said, hey, do you want to check your eyes? So she's like, this is my phone, I can't do it. But luckily, we have a loan policy where we loan people. Well, it's more gifting than loan because we don't ask for it back. We give iPod touches to patients. And we had a chap that came to clinic actually a year or 2 ago who said, I lost my charger. I can't do my test. And he was so distraught. We bought him a charger and gave it to him. And but she was such a champion, and her story was very cool. And I'll show you here. I know graphs and arrows are horrible, but bear with me. I'll explain it. So this is her chart for what I see about her tests. We talked about the dots, right? She was, prior to lockdown, with yellow arrow on the left, she's green, 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 some reds, you have good days, bad days, but she's predominantly green, no 3 reds in a row. Then lockdown happened, and she started going red, red, red. And I rang her in the green. I said, hey, your vision's worse. Do you want to come in for your treatment? Because you're having treatment, injections. She said, no, no, no. This was in June 2020, where everyone was so frightened of COVID, rightfully. So she said, no. I said, okay, fine, I'll call you later. So in the blue arrow, that was June 2020. And she said, oh, my eyes are worse. So she came in and, we learned about these scans, right, guys? So you see, this was her in January 2020, prior to lockdown. She's very good. She's getting 12 weekly injections, doing really well. And by June, she had these, you see the circles, the cysts, and that little crescent down here, that fluid had accumulated. We injected her, and on the right, you see her scores immediately picked up the week after. So she did really well. She's one of my kind of like success stories, and such a lovely woman. So I will end there, and then I think we only have a few minutes left. I think it's always better to leave a bit more time for chat. Any questions about weird devices?
Can I just make sorry, we're going to make an observation that you said about just tell patients to attend appointments. I mean, I'm in Guildford, and I sit on the diabetic eye screening program in Surrey as a whole, and it surprises me that the length that professionals like yourself go to make appointments for people, to call them back, and yet I still believe, from what they tell me, that the no-shows are still about 15 or 16%. Is that your experience as well? Is like, you can provide the treatment, people know it's important. How do you encourage people to come to an appointment? Are they scared, or did you find this?
A simple thing. So one of my passions is telemedicine. So I'm the director for telemedicine. I pushed this agenda so hard that I wrote a job description for myself, threw it at my CEO's desk. I said, you need to give me this title and a bit of time and money. And he did, because he had such foresight about 6-7 years ago. So telemedicine is important. Inviting people to a face-to-face appointment or a scan, useless. What we do in our pathways now is much more, I think, mindful of people. So we do phone calls 1 or 2 days before. It is not me that does it. I don't have time. A technician does it. Trained technician with a proforma of questions to ask the patient. They ask, do you feel your sight is better? How is your diabetic control? It's simple. They have 7 questions to ask. It takes no time at all, but it also reminds the patient of their appointment. Our DNA rates fell from, we were worse than that. We were at like 20-30% at some sites, less than, of course, some others. Our DNA rates are so low now because of that telephone encounter. So because all these questions are asked when patients come in, their journey time in our hospital where they come for a scan only is 30 minutes. It used to be 3-4 hours. They come, all the questions been asked, someone looks at it and goes, hi, Mrs. Smith, I see you think your vision is okay. We're just going to take a quick scan. Well done. The doctor will look at this and you will receive a letter. If you need to see a doctor in person or treatment, you will also be either written to or called within 2 weeks. And people are so happy. So in my face-to-face clinics now, since we instituted that about 5 years ago, I have patients that have their scan and leave. But those are those that need to see me because they have active disease, but they can't feel it. And I have technicians now, that's other bit of their job description, to run down to Costa, where they probably are getting coffee, and saying, you need to come back, the doctor wants to see you. So it's a real frame shift, because when we first started doing this, patients said, oh, where is the doctor? I want to see the doctor. Now, how can I not see the doctor? But they're so happy they're in and out in half an hour. And with diabetes, you're young and you have work and you have, actually, even if you're older, you have a life. You don't want to spend it, 3-4 hours in hospital.
Thanks, Don. I think Shri, you wanted to come in. Shri, what's your question? You have to hit the microphone button.
Thank you. Thank you, Don. It was very interesting, your talk. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Just one final question about the use of smartphone. Can the other people use it through the apps, or do they have to have a special smartphone?
No, any smartphone will do. It's not been adopted by NHS England. So in the past year, I've been trying to push NHS England to push this into their agenda, but they have other things in priority. There are 2 applications that are FDA approved and CE marked for site tests, because you can go into, your Apple Store, Google Play, whatever, and there's like 100, right? But they have to go through licensing and validation to be able to say, you can test your eyes. But what's more important is that test is connected to something that can bring you to a pathway, a treatment pathway, or a clinic, or a doctor, or specialist, or an optician. And that's not quite there yet. These projects that we do are very much pilots, but any smartphone will do. The other thing to highlight here is we are very passionate about digital inclusion. So people will talk about digital exclusion, but we want to redefine it as digital inclusion. And so at Moorfields, we have a big team of people much younger than me, much more energy and enthusiasm, that are looking into this, because we have a large proportion of our consultations as video. So when patients don't want video, they're invited to a special clinic of the don't want video patients. There's face-to-face with the consultant. They see the consultant and she tells them, hey, would you be keen to sit over there and video me? And then I have a volunteer, usually a medical student that wants a good reference. It's going to show you how to do it. And a lot of patients have uptaken this really well, because it's not that we don't want to see you. It's just, if we see you 5 times a year, maybe 3 of those times we can call you. Yeah, so that's kind of the future of where things are going.
Thank you.
Wonderful. I think, Shri, as you said, that was probably the final question for today. I think we have to wrap up, and therefore say a big thank you to you, Dawn, for making time and being here with us tonight. It's much appreciated. And it's good to have you as a friend of the group. So thanks so much on behalf of all of us. And I think the fact that we had so many questions just shows how relevant and topical, obviously, the talk has been. So thanks so much.